Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, what will the big surprise this year be for the Wolves? What will they do that we're not expecting? We'll look back and say this was a key to the season for Minnesota. This was a drastic improvement. We'll break down what I think that is next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Thursday, everybody. We are 2 days away from the start of preseason basketball for the Wolves. They're traveling to San Diego today to get ready for Wolves Nuggets on Saturday. And today I'm going to focus in on what I think the biggest potential surprises for Minnesota this season. And I'll explain a little bit more kind of background what I mean by that. But in short, what will we look back on and say, hey, look, this was a big piece of why the Wolves had a successful season. This was a development that we weren't necessarily expecting. It's not simply, oh, TJ Shannon is a good fill-in for Alexander Walker, or Ant took another leap like we talked about on yesterday's show. I think there's been an element of each of the last 2 years for Minnesota that kind of came out of left field that we weren't expecting. And in case of last year, it was mid-season. I'll explain what I mean about that here in a minute. What could that piece of the Timberwolves season be this year? We'll do all that here in just a minute. A big thank you, though, off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. Real quick, though, off the top, I do want to hit the Leonard Miller injury. Leonard Miller, it was announced on Wednesday, sustained a laceration, a right fifth finger laceration, and he'll be reevaluated in 2 weeks. So he'll miss, what's officially training camp. He'll miss the first 4 of 6 preseason games. And it's really like he's arguably, the side of like Rob Dillingham, the one guy on the roster that really can't afford that because he doesn't have a rotation spot. He is the only true big man depth beyond, the 3 in the rotation. Of course, Julius, Randle, Rudy, Gobert, and Reid. Beyond them, Rocco Zakarski's in a 2-way, and he's 19, and Jean Beringer is a first-round pick, but he's 19, 20. There isn't any other big depth. There's no more Luka Garza. There's no more Jesse Edwards. Like, that's it. And Leonard Miller isn't a center. He's more of a point forward type player, but in terms of actual big man depth, he would have, been the next man up. And still is, but it hurts for him to miss those reps at training camp and miss potential reps in preseason games. So I feel bad for Miller. Of course, he continues to score in the G League, continues to show that, he when given the opportunity, he's still a scorer. He's a guy with a handle and can pass. And it's the consistency and it's the defense and it's the rebounding are things that, the rebounding was pretty good in the G League last year, but really the consistency outside the arc as a shooter that the Timberwolves need to see if he's going to crack the rotation. Now, he wasn't going to crack the rotation this year anyway, at least not by design, only out of necessity would that be the case. But now he's going to be even further behind the 8 ball. So too bad that he'll be out at least the next couple of weeks. I wanted to acknowledge that here off the top, but there's not a whole lot else to say other than it's just a really bad break for him. And obviously not great for the Wolves either it's never good to have hurt guys. And, but I think it's a bigger impact on Miller himself than on the actual, like the Timberwolves plans here in training camp and preseason. All right, let's talk about this topic here today. So when I say the biggest surprise strength of this Timberwolves team, 2 years ago, I would have called it 3-point shooting. You could argue defense because the Wolves were literally the best defense in the league 2 years ago. And I guess the first year of Rudy Gobert, this team was 10th in the league in defensive rating. It was a good defense. They won 42 games. That was the year they remember. So not too much a history lesson here, but in 21-22, they got the 6th seed, lost to the Grizzlies in 6 games, gave them a run for their money. That was the playoff series where, Jordan McLaughlin played over D'Lo at times, and Kyle Anderson was really good for Memphis. And then that summer, Minnesota brings in Kyle Anderson. They trade for Rudy Gobert. The following year, some similarities to last season, where they took a half step back, and it's like, wait a minute, we were the 6th seed last year. Now we're in the play-in, and the Wolves lose to the Lakers. There's the Jaden McDaniels punch the wall, the Gobert Anderson, Kyle Anderson tussle, I guess, in game 82. Minnesota loses to Lakers then with Gobert suspended by the team, and then beats the Thunder of all teams to get the 8th seed, and then loses in 5 games, gentlemen sweep to the Nuggets. They took a half step backward in order to take a full step forward the following year when they won 56 games and went to the conference finals. That was the year I want to talk about, where they were first in defensive rating. They were dominant defense, was only the second time in the last, or the second largest gap between the best and second best defense in the last 20 years in terms of defensive rating. Just phenomenally dominant that season on defense. But the biggest surprise that year was the three-point shooting as a team. Minnesota was 3rd in the NBA in three-point percentage. They were middle of the pack in terms of attempts and rate. So that was down, or it wasn't where it needed to be. But the percentage, and this is with Ant shooting the league average from 3. Like, this is not last year. This is 2 years ago. But as a team, I mean, Mike Conley shot 44%. Karl-Anthony Towns shot nearly 42%. Nas was 41.5%. Nikhil was 39%, which is a little bit of a surprise on modest volume. Jordan McLaughlin shot 47%, actually led the team in percentage. And the worst outside of Jaden McDaniels, who took a step back that year, and I guess Kyle Anderson, Anthony Edwards was 35.7%. Kyle Anderson still attempted just under 1 3 per game and was 23% from outside the arc. But yeah, Minnesota was still 3rd in the NBA in three-point percentage. That was a really big part of Minnesota's offense that year. And it's really, they were a middle of the pack offense. They were like 16th, 17th in offensive rating. That is why this Wolves offense kind of stayed afloat. Because remember, they didn't play fast either. They were 24th in pace. They did an offensive rebound. They were bottom 3rd in the league in offensive rebound. They did get to the line some, but it was really, they made their threes at such a high clip that it kind of buoyed their offense. And then last year, I would argue that the surprise was the offensive rebounding in the second half of the year, especially. Remember, they started the year kind of how they did 2 years ago, where like they didn't grab a lot of offensive rebounds. It wasn't a focus. They just weren't a good offensive rebounding team, and it was kind of baked in. But then in January, I'll never forget, it was a post-game press conference Chris Finch gave. I think it was after they beat the Rockets in January, if I remember correctly. And Finch was like, yeah, I'm paraphrasing this, but he's like, we realize like teams are focusing on offensive rebounding now, because if you think about it, defenses are so worried about getting back that, or we said it better. Well, defense, I'll say it this way. Defenses are so worried about getting back, about getting out and running on offense, that you got guys contesting and releasing on the perimeter. And now if you stay in a rebound, you could rebound 5-on-4, maybe even 5-on-3 or 4-on-3. Plus, defenders obviously naturally have their backs turned to the basket if they're guarding. They're not going to see where the shot's coming from, where it's going off the rim, and where it's going as quickly, at least. Obviously, there's an art to it, but they're not going to see it quite as quickly, register as quickly as an offensive player. So if you crash the glass, and I'm not saying all 5, but if you have guys corner crashing, we saw Jaden McDaniels do that really successfully in the playoffs against the Suns a couple years ago. And then last year, it was legitimately a part of Jaden McDaniels' game. It's one of the reasons the offensive numbers look so much better, is because he became more active as a corner crasher and a rebounder overall. And you start to work those things in, and it's free. It's, a free bucket or 2 a game just by crashing the glass. And as long as you still have guys that are committed to getting back, and you have enough athletes and length and good defenders to get back in transition, then you add a whole new element to your game by being a better offensive rebounding team. And they finished top half of the league in offensive rebound rate. The first part of the year, they were middle of the pack. The second part of the year, they were in the top 10 easily, really kind of starting in January, late January, early February. And it was really just a schematic thing. Like, the Wolves just said, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to crash the glass more often. And it was intentional, sure. And then, of course, there has to be the effort level there. And they have the athletes and the size to do it. But it had to be, the coaching staff had to say, we're committing to this. And then the guys on the floor actually had to decide, we are going to commit to this. We're going to play hard and try and grab these rebounds on the offensive glass. And that was a big surprise last year. And it was one of the reasons why this offense got better as the year went on, and why this ended up being a clear-cut top 10 offense last year, because the offensive rebounding really supported everything else they were doing. I want to get into what I think it will be this year. There's a couple of candidates as far as like elements to the Timberwolves as a team that if you said it right now, it might be a bit of a surprise, or maybe we're just not expecting, but we'll look up here in a few months and be like, oh man, this is a big reason why the Wolves are, 27-7 or whatever I said they would be at the start of January. So we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move. Whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors, this is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. I love how the Peloton IQ system offers real-time strength coaching. It will actually track your reps, suggest the right weights, and correct your form, making every rep safer and smarter. The swivel screen is a game changer. You can go from running on the Tread Plus to strength training without missing a beat. Plus, the personalized class recommendations will keep you engaged. You get workouts tailored to your vibe and energy level each week. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. That's onepeloton.com. All right, so 2 years ago, the Timberwolves surprised with their three-point shooting as a team and their defense. Last year, it was offensive rebounding, especially in the second half of the year. This year, there's a couple of candidates here. One is free throw rate. Now, the Wolves were actually fairly consistent the last couple of years in free throw rate. It dipped a little bit last year, depending on where you look. Cleaning the Glass had them 8th in the league each of the last 2 years, and Basketball Reference had them 11th last year. Cleaning the Glass filters out end of quarter possessions that are often heaves and garbage time. So evidently the Timberwolves were much worse at drawing fouls in garbage time than they were in non-garbage time. But either way, the actual rate went down a little bit last year. And my argument is that I think they'll go from being a, bottom part of the top third, call it 8 to 12 in terms of free throw rate, to a top 3-4 team in free throw rate. Here's why I think that. First of all, I think Anthony Edwards got better as the year went on at drawing fouls. And early in the season, it was clear, like obviously the three-point volume went way up for Anthony Edwards. And of course, if your three-point volume goes up, you're likely shooting less twos. And in Ant's case, you're definitely shooting less paint twos. So yeah, you're getting to the line, going to get to the line less often. And overall, he ended up shooting 10 less free throws last season than he did the year before, despite playing 101 more minutes. So 10 less free throws and just over 100 more minutes. So obviously the free throw rate went down. You can look at it just straight per game. It was 6.4 free throws per game 2 years ago, 6.3 last year. So not dramatically, but it did go down. And the percentage was virtually the same. It was a tenth of percentage better last year than it was the year before. But the first half of the year was awful. And it really ramped up as the year went on. Overall, the free throw rate last year was still the second best of his career by far. Like, no question about it. His first All-Star year 2 years ago, or I guess now almost 3 years ago, 22-23, much lower free throw rate. So it's not a dramatic difference, but I think what he started to unlock the second part of the year last year was understanding some of the stuff I talked about on, it was either Monday or Tuesday's show this week, which was related to the Chris Finch conversation with Britt Robson at MinPost. So I guess it was Monday's show. Finch acknowledged that, hey, we need to get better at finishing at the rim. We essentially started a finishing school. He didn't use those words, but like they refocused to the player development level on how we're drawing fouls / finishing at the rim. And in Ant's case, this is me talking now. Well, actually, Finch alluded to this too. He talked about guys trying to avoid contact. And I'm going to say in Ant's case, he's so athletic that he can avoid contact and still make really tough shots some of the time. But what that's doing is you're not going to make really tough shots all the time. In fact, you're going to make them less of the time. So that's going to suppress your field goal percentage at the rim. And it's also going to lower your free throw rate. Because if you're not seeking the contact or at least finishing through the contact and instead avoiding it altogether because you're so athletic you can get away with it, you're able to do it that way, you're also going to suppress your free throw attempts. So your percentage at the rim and goes down and your free throw attempts go down. You're playing right into the defense's hands. So, and there's a difference between playing through the contact and playing to contact, right? You want to play through the contact, draw the foul, try and score. playing for the contact or playing to the contact is, Trae Young, James Harden, guys like that. And of course, embellishing isn't always a bad thing as long as and Ant's not embellishing anything. Like that's not how Anthony Edwards plays. He might, yell, hey, he definitely yells, hey, a lot. And he may get on refs. He definitely does that a lot, too much. But it's not because it's not fake stuff, right? Like he's actually trying to score and getting fouled and sometimes thinks he's fouled and he's not, but he's not faking anything, right? Sometimes he's just wrong about whether or not he was fouled. I mean, who hasn't done that in pickup basketball and who hasn't done that in the NBA, right? But he's not embellishing in the way that a Trae Young or a James Harden or, I don't mean to just suggest it's just those two guys doing it because tons of guys do it, but those are two really prominent ones. But for Ant, as long as he's finishing through the contact and he's honestly seeking it out to an extent, he's going to get a lot more free throw attempts this year. I think his free throw rate goes up. And he also talked about on Media Day about how if he's going to win MVP, he was asked about this, to be fair. I want to make sure I say that. But he basically said, hey, the recipe is if we win games and I score more, I'll have a chance at winning it. Well, yeah, I mean, he scored his points per game jump like 2 points year 1 to year 2, almost 3.5 from year 2 to year 3, 1.3 points from year 3 to year 4. And then from 4 to 5, it was a jump of 1.7 points per game. You take another 1 point, call it 1.5 points per game, and you're talking about 29.1 points per game. So if he takes a 1.7 jump, you're knocking at the door 30 points a game. That's MVP territory. I think he's got that on his mind, for better or for worse, and I think it's a good thing. And I think he's going to try and up his scoring a bit. I think he's going to take more shots. I think he's going to try and get to the line more often. It's funny, we actually saw his assist rate dip a little bit last year, and the usage rate go down a little too. But part of that was he was trying to, at sometimes did defer a little bit. Thought he was being a point guard. And in reality, the Wolves just need him to be Anthony Edwards and go score. Yeah, creating for others is going to be awesome. Operating pick and roll with Julius Randle is going to be great. But he has to find a way to squeeze the trigger himself a bunch and not just on threes. So I think that would be a big contributing factor is Ant's free throw rate will go up. I also think, secondarily, we're going to see, like Terrence Shannon Jr. is going to draw fouls at a much greater rate than Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Like that I think is kind of a no-brainer. They were actually, interestingly, if you take out the guys who weren't regular rotation guys for Minnesota, it all include Jalen Clark in this, but they were 6 and 7 on the Wolves last year. Nickeil and Terrence Shannon Jr. right next to each other on free throw rate. Now, Nickeil played 82 games. He played 1,700 more minutes than TJ Shannon. But I do think over the course of an NBA season, TJ Shannon's going to draw more fouls than Nickeil does. And he's going to be looking to score more in transition. Guys are going to be, he's going to be dunking on guys and pushing the pace. And I think TJ Shannon himself in the Nickeil role, like grand scheme of things, it's a relatively low number of free throws, but it's going to overall lift the team's free throw rate. And I think that Shannon in the Nickeil role, for the most part, is going to have a significant hand in that. And then the other thing is Jaden McDaniels. I think we're going to continue to see Jaden McDaniels' aggressiveness ramp up. He was another topic of the Chris Finch interview with Britt Robson that I thought was pretty interesting. But if you go and look at Jaden's career to this point, the free throw rate last year was higher than the year before, and it was the second highest of his career. The assist rate was a career high. The turnover rate was a career low. The offensive rebound rate was by far a career high, as was the total rebound rate. We're seeing him be more aggressive overall. We're seeing him giving himself these more additional opportunities. The offensive rebound rate, like I don't know what percentage of his free throws were after offensive rebounds, but that contributed to him shooting more free throws last year. I think a more aggressive Jaden McDaniels and TJ Shannon replacing Nickeil Alexander-Walker will kind of buoy the rest of the roster besides Ant to overall get more free throw attempts. I don't know that it's going to change dramatically for Julius Randle or Rudy Gobert or guys that are just lower volume players. Like Conley obviously is not going to get to the line anymore. So you make some of those improvements around the margins or in the margins, around the edges, if you will. And I think they're doing that with the TJ Shannon in the rotation. And I think Jaden McDaniels some natural progression in terms of his, we'll say, well-aimed aggression on offense. I think that's 100% on the table. So those guys plus Ant are going to, like, we could look up, but this is a top 3 team in free throw attempts. I think that's absolutely in the cards, potentially, for Minnesota. I have one other theory about what could happen on the defensive end of the floor this year, and maybe why the surprise isn't the defense getting better. I think it's more the offense, as we just talked about. So we'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The NFL season is entering week 5. In fact, it starts tonight, and FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. The line for the game on Thursday night has gone up. It was Rams minus 6.5. It's now Rams minus 7.5. I kind of sort of would take believe I would take the 49ers plus 7.5 at minus 105. That's better value than Rams minus 7.5 at minus 115. I do think that at 6.5, I would have leaned Rams, but at 7.5, I'm going to lean 49ers. I just have a tough time seeing San Francisco losing by too much more than a touchdown if they do lose this game at LA. Of course, Vikings-Browns from Europe on Sunday. That's an early game. The Browns, or I should say the Vikings, are favored by 3.5 points in that one at minus 110. Go check it out. You can bet now on those. You could live bet, which is a ton of fun with Thursday night game. Maybe it's the same game parlay. You want to, first touchdown scored by, I don't know, Devontae Adams or whatever you want to do. You could do that. You could, again, live bet during the game is one of my favorite things to do. If you're a casual fan or just love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes your game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, so I focused on the offense already as the area where I think that improvement's going to come from. Yesterday, I talked a little about the defense and some of the stuff that has to happen, especially in the non-Rudy Gobert minutes for Minnesota's defense. Like, that's where the defense needs to change the most. If you missed yesterday's episode, it's a must listen. I talked about, with Rudy on the floor, the defense and the offense, for that matter, was virtually the same as it was 2 years ago, the 56-win season. With Rudy off the floor, though, the offense was worse and the defense was worse. Or sorry, the offense was better, but the defense was a lot worse with Rudy off the floor. And that has to get better. I think that I think the offense, for the reasons we just talked about in the last segment, will get better. I do. I think the offense will continue to improve. It was mediocre 2 years ago. It was top 10 last year. I think it gets into the top 5 this year. And free throw rate and potentially pace is going to be a big piece of that. Pace is another thing I talked about yesterday. Minnesota's been 24th in pace the last 2 years. I think that goes up because I think Rudy will play less minutes overall. And I think it'll be a focus of the non-Rudy minutes is to really push the pace. You've got athletes. You've got TJ Shannon. You've got Rob Dillingham. You've got Ant. I know Ant doesn't like to push the pace of the ball in his hands, but I'll tell you what, he'll run if he gets a steal in the open floor. He'll run if he thinks he's going to get a lob dunk or a corner three out of it. So improving the pace is another thing I would add that I think happens this year. What I don't think necessarily happens is I'm not sure the defense will be significantly better than last year. And I know the Wolves are paying a lot of lip service to this or they did at Media Day, and I discussed this on yesterday's show that, they were the best defense in the league by far 2 years ago, and they slipped to, 8th last year? And maybe a recommitment to perimeter defense, point of attack defense, especially from the likes of Ant, are going to make a difference. Here's why I don't think the defense will necessarily be better than last year. Number one, Rudy Gobert may have lost a quarter of a step, maybe even just an eighth of a step last year, but he's not getting faster. He's not getting quicker. He's not getting more durable. Mike Conley was a bigger culprit last year, I think, with some of the defensive, and I use the word struggles or concerns lightly, I guess, because it was still a top 10 defense. But compared to the year before, I think the Conley piece is actually more harmful than the Rudy Gobert piece. I think Conley not being able to guard the point of attack like he could, or take the second highest usage opposing guard or wing and feeling good about that. I think that's a bigger deal than Rudy losing an eighth of a step, we'll call it, last season. Rudy was still very good defensively, as evidenced by the overall team numbers when he's on the floor versus when he's not. I also think not having Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and I know I've downplayed this a little bit because I don't think it's the biggest issue, but it is an issue, and filling those minutes with lesser defensive players. I think TJ Shannon could be 70% of what Alexander Walker was defensively. Maybe not quite this year. It might be 60% of what Nickeil was defensively. And Rob Dillingham's a minus defensively. If he plays hard, he can be a very slight minus. But if he's lackadaisical and he's diminutive, if he doesn't work hard and he's small, then he's a clear minus. So I think losing Alexander Walker and two of the three guys that are going to replace those minutes, and Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr., if those guys are below average defenders, and we don't really know yet, but I think it's likely, very likely Dillingham will be, and TJ is probably going to be slightly above average, but Nickeil is awesome. So handing those minutes over to lesser defensive players is going to matter too. And then to a lesser extent, I would say, I think Julius Randle is a better one-on-one defender for most matchups than Karl-Anthony Towns was. Not all, most. But I'm not convinced in the Julius team contributions defensively. I think the rebounding is a little spotty. I think the amount at which, the level at which he's locked in is iffy at best. And Cat certainly had the stray voltage stuff we always talked about, but I think there were some advantages on the team defensive side with Karl-Anthony Towns that isn't necessarily evident with Julius Randle. There were a couple of media day quotes related to, let's see, the defense was a focus of Chris Finch from media day. I'm going to see if I can pull the quote that I wanted here. Chris Finch talked about needing defensive consistency. And here's a quote from Finch. He said, I think, so talking about how they struggled in the conference finals, obviously against OKC, he said, there's an inconsistency we had in ball pressure, ball contain. A large part of our identity has been that when we're doing it. As you can see around the league, they're allowing it more, meaning the officials are allowing more contact on their perimeter when you're providing ball pressure. So you have to kind of take advantage of it. It's a major point of emphasis as we start training camp to kind of reestablish the presence on the ball. I agree with that. I think the ball pressure needs to be better. And that's where I have concerns about Mike Conley. I have concerns about not having Nickeil Alexander Walker. You take a year older Conley and take out Nickeil Alexander Walker. And now you're relying on Jalen Clark, depending on your matchups. You're relying on TJ Shannon, and you're relying even more heavily on Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards. I would bet if I had to pick the Wolves offense or defense to be better this year, I'd pick the offense. I think the offense improves and becomes a top 5 unit, and the defense kind of languishes in the 8 to 10 range, which of course isn't bad. You can still win a championship with the 8th best defense. But I think the offense actually solidifies itself as ahead of the defense in terms of its development this season. All right, that's all I got for you today. I'll be back tomorrow. We're still daily Monday through Friday, as we will be throughout the season. We'll get you ready for Wolves Nuggets on Saturday on tomorrow's show, among other things. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And again, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen. For your second listen, go find Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Josh Lloyd hosts the #1 fantasy basketball podcast, giving you daily tips and helping you win your league, all while making you a smarter NBA fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of that very same Locked On Network. And, we're your local experts on all the biggest stories across the board. All the Locked On shows do a fantastic job covering their local shows. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.